but I think very important ones. One is probably one of the most prolific employment and labor lawyers in Canada now, Catherine Marshall, and the other is Conservative Member of Parliament Garnet Genuis. Thank you very much. Thank you. Normally I do the show in my basement, so this is a real exciting development for me, but which was flooding the other day. So this is particularly good to not have like water pouring down on the show. But let's talk about the legal context here, because we know there are people that are in some cases probably directly targeted, in other cases less directly because of their political beliefs. I know in Ontario, there's in labor law or in human rights law, there's protection for creed, but that really doesn't extend to political beliefs. So do you have any protection?
Well, I mean, aside from calling me, no. This is one of the really interesting things is that pretty much everything under the sun these days is covered under human rights legislation, but not political protection. And what the woke mobs have figured out, and it's pretty smart, and they do it over and over again now because it's very effective, is that a great way to silence someone and get them to go away is by attacking their livelihood. You know, when you mess with someone's ability to put food on the table, they are going to censor themselves, unless they're Jordan Peterson or Jameel Giovanni, but you know.
But those ones are fewer and further between than other people. And let me ask you about this, Garnet, because I know you have a private member's bill that aims to specifically protect political discrimination by amending the Human Rights Act. And this is where you have protections for, as Catherine mentioned, everything else. I mean, it is actually a bit amusing. And I'll quote Caitlyn Jenner, who said she had a harder time coming out as a Republican than coming out as transgender. Because right now you could identify as a woman, but not as a conservative if you want the protection of the Canadian Human Rights Act. So why do you think that's the vehicle to address this?
Yeah, and first of all, it's great to be on your show. It's great to be here with all of you. And I think it's very important that as conservatives, we be people of hope, right? We don't buy into these kind of declinist narratives where everything's getting worse and it's just going to keep getting worse until the end of time, right? No, there are reasons for us to be involved in politics and to be hopeful that we can make concrete policy changes that are going to make our lives and our country better. And one of those ways is to very simply support my private member's bill. It's C-257. There's a parallel bill, S-257, from Senator Salma Atulajan, a conservative senator. And these bills would add political views and activity as prohibited grounds of discrimination in the Canadian Human Rights Act. So right now, if you're an airline employee, a bank employee, these are workplaces in the federal jurisdiction, and your employer says, I don't like your religion, I don't like your marital status, whatever it is, you're fired because of it. Then you could take them to a human rights tribunal, because we would all accept that firing someone, discriminating against someone because of their ethnic identity, sexual orientation, religion, marital status, etc. There's a long list, that's unacceptable. But if your boss says, hey, I'm going to fire you because you were advocating for lower taxes, or a pro-life position or something, I'm going to fire you because of that political view or activity, then you have no recourse. And the great thing is we have this existing framework designed to protect people from discrimination. It just doesn't include political views. So it's a very, I think, simple, reasonable fix. There are certain parameters around human rights legislation. It's legitimately balanced against other things, and we can talk about some of those limitations and exceptions. But it essentially fits this protection against political discrimination within the wider jurisprudence that exists. And I will say it's not so radical. This protection doesn't currently exist at the federal level. It doesn't exist in a number of the larger provinces, such as Ontario or Alberta, but actually a majority of Canadian provinces have some kind of protection against political discrimination in their human rights statute. So not at the federal level, not in a couple of our larger provinces, but in a majority of provinces, it's already protected.
Now, I should just say on a housekeeping note, the Canadian Human Rights Act governs federal government and federally regulated sectors. So radio is one. So let me ask you, Catherine, in the case of Jameel Giovanni, if the law that Garnet wants to see were there on the books, do you think that would change the Jameel case going up against a big media telecom company?
Yeah. So, firstly, what Jameel's doing is something that most people would never do. Like the idea of taking on like a massive corporation when you've been mistreated is something that most people that makes them want to hide in a hole. So it takes a lot of bravery to do that. I see a lot of mistreatment. I see a lot of political discrimination. People come to me all the time, but most people who are willing to go forward, like I would say 1% of the people who I see, it would make a difference. Bell is a they're part of a federally regulated industry. Why is there not a legislative protection for people who work there to be protected from political discrimination? And hopefully this case will change that. I mean, we're hoping to set a precedent. And, something that's really disturbing that I see happen is people will get terminated or they'll get hauled into HR meetings about maybe something they posted on social media or a comment they made at the water cooler, or, hey, it comes out from, a privacy breach that they donated to a certain cause, and they get disciplined or they get fired. And that is a traumatic experience to begin with. But then the idea of like having to then launch a lawsuit and fight your employer and have them call you a racist or call you a bad person or call you a misogynist or whatever other horrible label they're going to give you, and then be publicly shamed. But just most people don't go down that path. And that's why we're not seeing enough change in the system. These companies are getting away with it. The mobs are learning it's a very effective tactic. And then, they've learned that because they get the success from doing it, they do it more and more. So I'm fighting it. I hope other lawyers will join me. And it's great to have clients who are willing to go out there and kick some butt as well.
If I can just quickly add to that point, because I think that's really critical, that what motivates me in this is there are the high profile cases that folks will be aware of, the Jordan Petersons, Jameel Giovannis. These are people who are already involved in public speaking, have a public profile, and have a sense of how to fight and how to challenge these things. What I'm most concerned about, what motivates me, are the everyday normal people who didn't sign up for politics or controversy, who just want to be able to live their lives, do their jobs, and provide for their family, people that we've never heard of, but who hold common sense opinions, maybe who don't hold common sense opinions, by the way, because protecting people against political discrimination applies to everybody, and it should, right? But if somebody is simply expressing their points of view in social media posts, around the water cooler, it's all of those cases we don't hear about of people that are intimidated into silence, who don't have recourse, that if a bill like mine passes, they'll have some tools available to them. And using the Human Rights Act, it's often a much more accessible remedy. There are some cases, Crown corporations, federal government, where someone could litigate under the charter, but that would be likely much more complicated and expensive, and they have an easier remedy available to them if we use the remedies that exist in the Human Rights Act.
But let me challenge the premise that human rights law is the vehicle for this, because we were talking earlier in the show about the institutional challenges, and human rights tribunals have not been kind to conservatives in the past, I'd say. I mean, it was the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal that was going after conservative bloggers when Section 13 was there. It was the Alberta Human Rights Tribunal that was going after Ezra Levant for publishing the Danish Muhammad cartoon. So if you put political discrimination in, does that not actually expand the power of these organizations that could be weaponized against conservative business owners, say?
Do you know what it does? Adding it to human rights legislation is at least a significant message that this is wrong. And employers do pay attention to that. I think that having it codified, at least is going to have, that baseline. Okay, this is wrong. You can't do this. And if you do it, if you breach this right, people are going to have some legal remedies. But I hear all your concerns about the human rights tribunal systems. As someone who litigates a lot of them, I've got my own frustrations. But I wanted to touch on something that you brought up earlier. We were talking about high profile people getting targeted. And of course, the Jordan Peterson case is another example of something that I find very disturbing, which is these groups of people are using professional regulators and the complaint systems to launch these bad faith complaints against people they want to silence. And I've had a lot of conversations with like doctors and lawyers and people who'll come up, quietly to me and they'll say, Catherine, I deleted my Twitter account. I'm not writing anymore. I'm so terrified that if I say something that someone doesn't like, I'm going to get a complaint. I'll lose my license. I'll be suspended, and then I'll have no ability to put food on my table. And that's very disturbing. People who have interesting things to say, who should be thought leaders in their professions, are removing themselves from the arena. And it's becoming this thing where it's like, okay, are the only people who are going to share their views are people who have nothing to lose, or maybe in their basements unemployed? That's not a good thing for our society or democracy.
No, and let me get your take on that. And I'm also curious about the concerns with the tribunal system as well.
Yeah. To your question about the appropriateness of the vehicle, I mean, I think there's a level of pragmatism that we have to have about the kinds of structures and institutions that exist. But I think it's also important to say that this shifts the balance of the calculations that those bodies are going to make. So now if you have a complaint made against somebody on the basis of discrimination on one category, they can also talk about political discrimination. So there's, and that doesn't mean that one would necessarily trump the other, right? But it means that that freedom of speech in the expression of a political point of view becomes explicitly part of the calculation that these bodies have to take into consideration. And finally, look, I'll say it's true of everything we do, right? Personnel is policy. These tribunals are only as good as the appointments of the people that are on them. That's inevitable, and that's maybe another conversation, which is, how do we ensure that people who are going to apply certain principles in a way that is reasonable are given the power to apply those principles. But I don't think we should give up on our ability to appoint strong, reasonable people to these kinds of bodies. The question is just is the framework that they're being given reasonable and balanced? And I think it's just common sense that if we are going to have these bodies that are adjudicating complaints about religious discrimination and other forms of discrimination, then why not include political discrimination as part of a calculation?
For all you people that want to run for office, everyone wants to be finance minister, apply to be one of these one of these people on the tribunals, because oftentimes when conservative governments come in office, they have, like however many thousands of roles to fill. And there aren't that many thousands of conservatives that want to sit on some government tribunal. So you end up even with, Stephen Harper in power, but all of these like woke liberals on the Canadian Human Rights Commission. So that's a place to get involved as well. Let me turn back to you on this, Catherine, because one of the big challenges is that you may have a case where you've got some, really woke lefty employer that is discriminating against an employee. But one of the things with cancel culture that happens is you get people that very viciously target an individual and they want to destroy their life, and they look up their LinkedIn and say, oh, this person is a junior sales secretary in the department of whatever, and they go after a company that may actually have no interest in getting into politics, but the company goes into crisis mode and they capitulate. And we've seen this happen time and time again. So I do think that putting it on the radar to say to companies, this is not consequence free, and you may capitulate to get the Twitter mob on side, but you're going to have another fight if you do.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I often advise my employer clients and my corporate clients that, look, if you don't have the back of your people, the people that you chose to hire, that you put into the roles, that might have, they might have great performance, but yeah, maybe they did an off-color tweet or they did something stupid on social media or whatever, then you're signaling to the world that you don't have a backbone and they can come after any of your people. And it sets a terrible precedent. I mean, obviously it exposes the company to a wrongful dismissal suit, but more to the point, what kind of a message are you sending your own employees when you're not going to have their back because a few, mob wokesters kind of, doxed your employee? And I think part of the problem is a lot of companies, they panic, the idea of like trending and, they freak out. They don't know how to deal with this. The first thing they do is the worst idea, which is to just fire the person, and they're trying to manage their own crisis. And of course, anyone in crisis management can tell you, like, don't manage your own crisis. It's a really bad idea. But they've got to have more backbone. And, I'm seeing a lot of this type of political discrimination and mistreatment happen in corporate environments that are not traditionally like woke. Like it's sort of everywhere. It's really any company where you have, people who are just very cautious. They're very risk adverse, and like they're firing people for saying or doing something that has nothing to do with their service or their product. And I think it's something that employers really have to take more of a responsibility in, because this is not going to change unless companies also change their policies.
Yeah, I remember back in, I think it was, well, actually, I know for a fact it was 2018, there was this pipeline demonstration that was taking place, and someone went to Domino's and picked up some pizzas and brought them there. And then it ended up becoming this controversy where Domino's was forced to comment for the crime of selling pizza to someone. And I wrote a column at the time about it, combating against sort of corporations that were wading into politics. And then I got fired 3 days later, but it was unrelated. That was one of the other big radio companies. But there is
You should have called me.
I should have, yeah.
Is this sort of the domino effect we're seeing?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
That's good, because that means I didn't make the worst joke of the show. So thank you for that, Garnet. But I won't discriminate against you for your humor or lack thereof. I don't know. No.
We're not proposing to add that.
Yeah.
That you can still fire someone for telling bad jokes.
So let's be a bit more forward-looking here, because I think that obviously legal mechanisms are very important, but I think you were touching on this as well, Catherine. The culture needs to change as well. And the one thing I've often said about cancel culture in general, not in a business context, is that people who resist what's happening need to speak up and defend the victims, because the mob is very, very loud. The mob is very loud. And when someone is being targeted, as someone who's been through the cancel culture mill, the thing that you get a lot of are people that say, I'm with you, but shh, don't tell anyone. And we need people that are going to stand up. And I'd say for companies as well, they need to know that there are people that are going to back them for doing the right thing as well.
That's a really good point. I've acted for a lot of clients who've been canceled, and it is a horrifying experience. And you do feel like you want to die. I have clients who've felt suicidal. I mean, there's really not that shame of being canceled and told that you're not worthy of being in society anymore. It's one of the most terrible human emotions. And I get so upset when I see people being canceled or targeted. And I totally agree with you, Andrew. Like, we have to stand up. If we see it, as conservatives especially, we have to go out there and defend that person and support that person. And that means the world to that individual, but it's also a way of fighting back against that cancel culture and showing the mob that there's going to be people who will defend that person, and that person is not alone. And I think that's so critically important. So yeah, I mean, ironically, one of my other cases, and this is also in the media, is I'm acting for a former chair of the Alberta Human Rights Commission who was canceled. I mean, ironically, so yeah, I mean, going back to the earlier point, it would definitely make a difference, at least if in our laws in this country.
I would, by the way, love for you to take the Human Rights Commission to the Human Rights Commission. I've been waiting for that for years.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
I mean, on the culture, the question I would ask people is, look, why do you want to personally punish someone for sincerely holding a different point of view than you do? I just have a hard time understanding this mentality, right? Like if I meet somebody who is a socialist or whatever, I'm gonna disagree with them. I'm gonna, maybe if time allows, talk to them about why I disagree with them.
Hide your wallet, yeah.
But yeah, but the idea that I would like wish them harm, that I would want them to lose their job, not be able to provide for their family, is just absurd and so foreign to me. I don't think conservative employers should be able to discriminate against their left-wing workers either. Like, I think it goes both ways. I just don't think that's happening. I think generally it's the other way around. But I can't fathom this mentality of like wishing someone ill for having sincerely considered a political issue and come to a different conclusion than me. And I think we just have to ask people, like, aside from the merits of this person's point of view, like, why can't you have a conversation with them about the particulars of the issue rather than condemning them morally and trying to harm them because of the political conclusions they've come to?
But this is what sets the right apart from the left, and why in this day and age, despite how the Liberals have been in the past, the right is the only vehicle for championing free speech. And it's funny because if you were to put all of the victims of cancel culture in a conference room, I think actually maybe we did, I don't know. But in general, if you were to put them in a conference room, you're going to find people that are on the left there. There's a professor from Alberta named Frances Widdowson who is a literal Marxist, but she has a lot more conservative friends than liberal friends because they support free speech and they support her position on, speaking out on Indigenous issues the way she does. There are my colleague at True North, Lindsay Shepherd, was never a conservative, but she's found a home in conservative among conservative people because they're the ones that were kind of like Garnet was saying, come as you are, we don't care, just have your position here. And it is cyclical. And I think that would be the one bit of advice I'd give to people on the left is you may think you're immune from this, but you're not. And one of the more amusing examples, there was this guy who a few years ago had, gotten some little viral moment with Busch, the beer company. And, some reporter from the Des Moines Register found some tweet of his from, I don't know, like 1873 that, was mildly off color when he was a teenager and then canceled him. And then someone dug into the reporter and found a tweet of his that was off color and then canceled the reporter. And it's like, who wins at the end of this? So it is like a race to the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, I've been listening to a lot of Breanne Brown recently, so I apologize in advance. But something that she says that I love is that if you live in the arena, you're going to get burned. You are going to fall on your face. And if you take risks with your life and you actually go out and do something and say something and hold opinions, yeah, you're going to have people who criticize you. And I think this sort of scary notion that's emerged with cancel culture of, okay, I'm just going to be super safe. I'm not going to ever say anything. I'm never going to hold any opinion. And I'm just going to hope that I just make it through life. That sucks.
Yeah.
That's boring. That's terrible. We don't want that.
Yeah, it was like the old joke was, what's a liberal's favorite wine? You can't say that. And I think that there is something to that. It's like, I don't want to live the life that, has to be so scripted and choreographed like that. So we're winding down our time here, but let me just end with the same question to you both, and we'll start with you, Garnet. Are you an optimist or a pessimist on this?
Well, I'm fundamentally optimistic about what we can do specifically through legislation, again, through my private member's bill, C257. I mean, I've been told you need to repeat these things. C257 could use all of your support. If it passes, then we will have legislation at the federal level in federal jurisdiction that will provide recourse to people who face political discrimination. And I think we have some provincial elected officials in the room and others that are involved in that level. So seeing these kind of parallel legislation at the provincial level as well. I think we do need broader cultural change, and that's going to take time, just kind of pushing our friends and neighbors saying, hey, let's have respectful disagreements, but not try to punish each other for being wrong. But I think we can legitimately use the tools that already exist for human rights protections. And I don't think it's that likely that this legislation will make it all the way through the process in this parliament, given the timelines and so forth. But it has the strong support of our caucus, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to see bills stopping political discrimination be implemented and become law. If not in this parliament, then under Prime Minister Poliver.
Optimist or pessimist?
I'm definitely optimistic, especially because of the work that Garnet's doing, and when I've got clients like Jameel Giovanni and people who are willing to go out there and be the pointy end of the spear and fight the system. I think that there is a cultural change that's happening. We just need more people to speak up and stand up and not be afraid to beat down the system and challenge the system. And look, I've got a lot of frustrations with the system as someone who litigates. I mean, there's a lot about the court system, the human rights system that I don't like and I have issues with, but it's the only system that we have. And I always say to my clients, we just, these are the cards we've got and we got to play them. And there's also creative things that we can do to get people thinking outside of the box. But the biggest thing I think we can all do in this room, and it's something that I personally really tried to do, and it does put me in the line of fire sometimes. And I've also gotten like crazy, weird complaints like from crazy people as well, which is, you know, if I see someone getting canceled or doxxed or abused on social media because they did something or they tweeted something or they donated somewhere, I'll go out there like and publicly stand up for them. And I don't really care if someone comes at me and calls me terrible names, because I know what it does to those people. And the idea that someone's going to feel so emotionally like ruined because of this makes me really upset. So, you know, we've got to do that, and it takes some courage, but it's something that conservatives, I think, are really good at.
I don't stand up for them because it usually makes their problems worse when I'm in their corner. So it's like, see, look, they're like Andrew Lawton. But in any case, I've always said, especially in the last year, I think the most terrifying thing you could ever see in a courtroom is Catherine Marshall on the other side of it. You've been doing amazing work, and I thank you for that and for being here today. And Garnet Genuis, Conservative MP, thank you as well, sir. That does it for us. We are going to wrap things up here. There's going to be, for those of you in the room with us now, there's going to be a brief break, and then Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre will be joining us next. But for this episode of the Andrew Lawton Show, we're signing off. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening